On a frozen road near Lake Superior, an isolated cabin kept one light on through the night. Inside lived a man who had learned to survive by staying distant, a veteran who believed solitude was safer than hope. Then, one winter storm changed everything. A knock in the dark, a choice he didn't plan to make, and lives that arrived broken, cold, and in need of warmth. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Marquette, Michigan sits on the southern rim of Lake Superior like a town built to endure. In summer, it looks almost gentle. Weathered brick storefronts along Washington Street, fishing boats rocking in the lower harbor, tourists drinking coffee as if the lake were just scenery. But in deep winter, Marquette becomes something else. The air turns glassy and sharp. Wind sweeps off Superior with the patience of a force that has never lost an argument, pushing snow sideways until it feels like the world is being erased in front of your eyes. The lake groans under ice and pressure, a low, ancient sound that travels through the ground and into the bones of any house standing too close to the shore. On nights when the temperature falls hard and stays there, even the streetlights seem to dim, as if the town itself is conserving warmth. Evan Cross lived at the far end of a narrow lakeside road where plows arrived late and rarely bothered with perfection. His house was an old cedar-sided place with a pitched roof and a porch that creaked in summer and complained in winter. The porch rail had been patched twice, not neatly, but sturdily. An honest repair, the kind that doesn't pretend to be pretty. A single yellow bulb hung by the front door. Evan kept it on every night, not because he was afraid of the dark, not because he expected visitors. He kept it on the way some men kept a knife within reach, a habit built in a place where mistakes were expensive. He was 42, tall and lean, with the kind of strength that doesn't come from a gym, but from lifting and carrying things that don't care about your comfort. His hair was dark brown, cut close on the sides, longer on top but never styled. He had a trimmed stubble that shadowed his jaw and emphasized its angles, making his face look harder than it was. A faint crease ran between his eyebrows, the permanent mark of a man who'd spent too many years squinting into sun and dust and threat. His eyes were a washed-out gray-green, watchful without being dramatic. When he spoke, he didn't waste words. When he listened, he didn't pretend. The town knew him in small, practical ways. He bought groceries at the same time every week. He paid in cash. He nodded at the clerk, a woman named Denise with copper hair and a tired kindness, and he carried his bags out without conversation. In warmer months, he took odd jobs repairing boats and dock hardware down by the marina. In winter, he disappeared, not in a mysterious way, just in the plain. Lonely way some men do when they don't want anyone to notice how quiet their lives have become. There was no dog waiting for him, no cat weaving through his ankles, no second mug on the counter. Evan's house contained only the sounds he made and the ones the weather forced on him. The whine of wind under the eaves, the slow tick of wood contracting in cold, the occasional pop of the stove when a log shifted and settled. He had chosen solitude with the same intention he applied to everything else. Solitude asked nothing. Solitude didn't leave. His days followed a tight loop that kept him from drifting. He woke before sunrise, not because he needed to, but because his body still carried a schedule it refused to abandon. He split wood when the snow wasn't too deep. He shoveled the steps. He checked the generator. He kept his tools clean and arranged as if order could prevent surprise. He ate simply. Soup, bread, coffee strong enough to bite. When the sun set, he fed the stove, locked the door, and sat with a book he sometimes read and sometimes just held, as if the weight of it kept his hands from reaching for old thoughts. On the afternoon, the storm rolled in. The sky lowered early and stayed low. The lake vanished behind white curtain. Snow came in thick, aggressive sheets that erased the road, softened the fence posts, swallowed the world down to the length of Evan's porch. It was the kind of weather that made reasonable people cancel plans and stay put. Evan was reasonable, but he wasn't the kind of man who trusted comfort. He checked the weather radio, listened to the county warnings, and then did what he always did. prepared. He filled the kettle, he charged his phone, he stacked extra wood inside by the stove, he tested the porch light and left it on, a steady yellow dot in a world turning white. He told himself the light was for him, so he could see the steps, so he wouldn't slip, so he wouldn't break a leg out here alone. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Years ago, in a place whose name he didn't speak anymore, he had learned that light meant return, a point of reference, a way back. He had watched men vanish into darkness and not come out. He had watched others come back because a small signal held, a chem light, a flashlight beam, a single bulb somewhere that said, here is the line that still exists between you and nothing. That night, the storm grew teeth. The wind slammed against the house in waves. Snow packed the windows until the world beyond became a blur of motion and white. Evan moved with the same calm he used when the world got loud. He checked the stove, checked the locks, checked the window latches. He did not pace. He did not sit in the dark and imagine worst-case scenarios. He did tasks. Tasks were honest. Tasks could be finished. At around 9, he heard the ice on the lake shift, a low boom that rolled through the air like distant thunder. The sound used to startle him. Now it simply reminded him where he lived. He fed the stove again and poured himself coffee, though it was too late for it. He drank it anyway. At 9:43, the power flickered and held. The porch light blinked once, then steadied. Evan's eyes moved to it automatically, his mind measuring the length of the outage that hadn't happened. He waited. The light stayed on. Then he heard something he did not expect in weather like this. A knock. Not the frantic pounding of panic, not the timid tap of uncertainty. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, as if whoever stood outside had decided the door would open because doors were meant to open. Evan did not move for a full 2 seconds. In that pause, his body ran through old options the way it always did. Distance, cover, angle, exit. He turned off the kitchen light. He left the stove glow. He stepped toward the door without rushing, his boots quiet on the worn floorboards. He did not look through the window first. Windows made silhouettes. Instead, he stood to the side and listened. There was breathing outside. Faint, controlled. Then another knock, 1 knock this time, slower, softer, almost respectful. Evan slid the deadbolt back with a careful hand. He opened the door a few inches. The wind shoved at it immediately, trying to force it wide. Evan held it in place with his shoulder and looked out into the storm. A child stood on his porch. The boy was small for his age, maybe 11, maybe 12. He wore a thin navy coat that looked like it belonged to a warmer season, the fabric dark with melted snow. A knit hat sat too high on his head, leaving his ears exposed and red. His cheeks were pale, lips tinged bluish from cold. His eyelashes carried tiny ice crystals. He was shivering, but his eyes were clear. That was what hit Evan hardest, not the shivering, not the storm, but the boy's focus. He looked like someone who had decided panic was useless and had moved on to the next thing, survival. "I saw your light," the boy said. His voice was rough, not from crying, but from wind scraping his throat raw. He did not step forward. He did not beg. He simply stood there, shoulders hunched against the cold, and waited as if waiting had been his job for a long time. Evan's mind snapped into a narrow, practical lane. No adult behind him, no car lights on the road, no tracks he could see in the drifted snow, only chaos. A child did not walk out here alone in this weather unless something had already gone wrong. "What's your name?" Evan asked, keeping his voice level. "Lucas," the boy said. He swallowed. "My mom, she's in the car. She's sleeping." The way he said sleeping, flat, careful, told Evan the boy didn't fully believe the word, or he believed it because he needed to. Evan opened the door wider. The warmth from the stove spilled out, a thin mercy in the wind. "Come inside," he said. Lucas hesitated for half a heartbeat, then stepped over the threshold quickly, boots leaving wet prints on the floor. The smell of cold air and snow came with him, sharp and metallic. Evan shut the door and locked it. The storm kept screaming outside, but the cabin suddenly held another presence, another breath. Lucas stood just inside, shoulders still hunched, eyes scanning the room as if memorizing exits. He looked at the stove and the warmth it promised, but he didn't move toward it until Evan gestured. "Sit there," Evan said, pointing to the chair closest to the fire. "Hands out. Let them warm." Lucas obeyed without argument. As his hands hovered over the heat, Evan saw the rawness on his knuckles, the beginnings of frostbite on 2 fingertips. Evan's jaw tightened. He went to the kitchen, filled a bowl with warm water, and brought it over. "Slow," Evan said. "Don't burn yourself." Lucas nodded, lips pressed tight, trying not to show how much it hurt. Evan watched him for a moment and felt something old stir, an instinct he'd buried under years of keeping distance. It wasn't pity. It was duty. The kind that arrives before you can talk yourself out of it. Outside, the porch light kept burning, steady and yellow in the storm, as if it had been waiting for this exact night. The warmth of the cabin did not erase the cold immediately. It clung to Lucas the way fear does, slow to release, reluctant to let go. Evan Cross watched the boy from a careful distance, not out of suspicion, but respect. People who had crossed something difficult often needed space more than comfort. Lucas sat in the chair near the stove, hands hovering over the heat, fingers stiff and blotched red. Steam rose faintly from his sleeves as the snow melted and soaked into the worn fabric of his coat. Evan knelt once more beside him, checking the boy's hands with a light, practiced touch. The skin was cold but pliable, the numbness already retreating. Not severe frostbite. Not yet. Evan exhaled quietly, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until it leaves. "You did the right thing," Evan said, not as praise but as fact. "Hands out, slow." Lucas nodded. He had a narrow face, all angles and youth, with dark hair cut unevenly, as if it had been trimmed by someone who didn't have time to finish. His eyes were brown and too steady for his age, the kind of eyes that watched adults closely because they had learned adults did not always notice what mattered. Evan stood and moved back toward the kitchen, his boots leaving soft, damp prints on the floorboards. He poured hot water into a mug, dropped a tea bag in, and added a spoon of honey. He set it on the table to cool while he pulled a heavy blanket from the hall closet. It smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. He draped it over Lucas's shoulders without ceremony, careful not to startle him. "Drink when it won't burn you," Evan said. Lucas wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep in through the ceramic. "Thank you," he said quietly, like he wasn't used to his voice carrying much weight. Evan nodded once and leaned against the counter. Silence filled the room, not awkward, just present. Outside, the wind hurled snow against the siding, a reminder that whatever had brought Lucas here was still out there, waiting. After a few minutes, Lucas spoke again. "You didn't ask why I came." Evan didn't look at him. He watched the kettle, the way the steam curled and disappeared. "You came because you needed to," he said. "The rest can wait." Lucas considered that, eyes narrowing slightly. Adults usually rush the rest. He took a careful sip of tea and winced, then smiled faintly when the warmth hit his throat. "My mom's name is Sarah," Lucas said. "She's not from here." The name landed in the room and stayed there. Evan turned now, listening fully. "Where's she from?" "Downstate. Lansing, I think. She works nights sometimes." Lucas paused, fingers tightening around the mug. "She was driving too long. She said she was fine." Evan had heard that sentence before, in many forms, from many mouths. He kept his voice level. "Where's the car?" Lucas looked down. "By the old logging road, near the bend where the trees lean in." Evan pictured it immediately, the stretch of road that dipped low, where snow drifted deep and cell service vanished without apology. A bad place to stop, even in good weather. "How long ago?" Evan asked. Lucas swallowed. "I don't know. It was dark. I went to sleep. When I woke up, it was really cold." She wasn't talking. Evan felt the familiar tightening behind his ribs. He did not let it show. Panic helped no one. "Is she breathing?" Lucas hesitated. "I think so. I couldn't tell." That was answer enough. Evan moved with purpose now, the way he did when thinking was finished and action began. He grabbed his coat, heavy and insulated, and pulled on his gloves. He took the weather radio from the counter and clipped it to his belt. He grabbed the flashlight, fresh batteries, wide beam, and a small medical kit from the cabinet under the sink. He paused at the door and looked back at Lucas. "You staying right here?" Evan said. By the stove, blanket on, drink your tea. Lucas nodded immediately. The idea of being told to stay felt like safety. Evan opened the door and stepped back into the storm. The cold hit him hard, slicing through layers and memory alike. He pulled the hood up and turned toward the road. The porch light cast a weak halo behind him, shrinking quickly as he moved away from the house. Snow swallowed his boots with each step, the wind pushing at his chest like a hand trying to turn him back. The logging road was worse than he remembered. Snow had drifted chest-high in places, sculpted into deceptive curves by the wind. Evan moved carefully, probing with his foot before committing weight. His breath came out in controlled bursts, fogging the beam of his flashlight. He found the car half buried against a stand of birch, the front end angled toward the ditch. The hazard lights were off. The engine was cold. Evan circled once, scanning for movement, for tracks. Nothing. He reached the driver's door and pulled it open. Sarah sat slumped against the seatbelt, head tilted slightly forward. She was in her mid-30s, Evan guessed, with pale skin and dark blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail that had fallen apart. Her face was drawn and grayish, lips dry and cracked. She wore a thin jacket, the kind meant for short walks between buildings, not nights like this. Her hands rested limply in her lap. Evan leaned in, careful and deliberate. He placed 2 fingers against her neck, a pulse, slow, weak, but there. He pressed his ear near her mouth, breath shallow and uneven. "Okay," he murmured, more to himself than her. "You're still here," he assessed quickly. Hypothermia, likely dehydration, no obvious trauma. He loosened the seatbelt and adjusted her position, supporting her head and neck. He wrapped a thermal blanket around her torso, tucking it close. When he touched her hands, she stirred slightly, a faint sound escaping her throat. "Stay with me," Evan said, voice firm but calm. "You don't get to stop yet." He reached for his phone and tried for a signal. Nothing. As expected. He switched to the weather radio and caught a faint emergency frequency, enough to broadcast but not receive. He keyed in the call, relaying location and condition with the clarity of a man who had done this under worse circumstances. Help was on the way, but not fast. Evan looked back toward the cabin. The porch light was barely visible through the storm, a distant star refusing to be swallowed. He made a decision without ceremony. He would keep Sarah alive until help arrived. There was no alternative. He checked her again, monitoring breathing, adjusting the blanket, shielding her from the wind as best he could. Minutes passed, measured not by time but by function. Breath in, breath out, still here. When the rescue vehicle finally cut through the white with flashing lights, Evan felt relief land in his body like weight returning to gravity. He flagged them down and assisted as they transferred Sarah onto a stretcher. The paramedic, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and tired eyes, gave Evan a brief nod. "She's lucky," the man said. "Another hour." Evan didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He watched as they loaded Sarah into the ambulance and pulled away, lights fading into the storm. The road went quiet again, the wind reclaiming the sound. Evan turned back toward the cabin, the cold already clawing at him anew. When he opened the door, warmth rushed out to meet him, along with the smell of tea and wood smoke. Lucas was still in the chair, blanket wrapped tight, eyes snapping up the moment Evan entered. "She's alive," Evan said. Lucas's shoulders sagged, the tension finally finding a place to release. He nodded once, hard, and pressed his lips together. He did not cry. Not yet. Evan closed the door and locked it. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the distance between light and truth had narrowed. The storm did not end when the ambulance disappeared down the road. It only changed shape. The wind eased enough to stop howling and settled into a steady, grinding push against the cabin walls, as if the night were testing for weakness. Inside, the heat from the stove pressed outward in slow waves, reclaiming space inch by inch. Evan Cross hung his coat near the door, snow dripping onto the mat, and stood still long enough to let his breathing return to normal. His hands ached, the dull, familiar pain of cold that had gone too far and then been pulled back. Lucas watched him from the chair by the stove. The boy had pulled the blanket tighter around himself, knees drawn up, posture small but contained. His face had color again, though shadows still lived beneath his eyes. He looked older than he had an hour ago. as if fear had pushed him forward a few years and decided to stay. "She's alive," Evan had said, and Lucas had nodded, hard and fast, like agreement might make it permanent. Now, with the house quiet, the words hovered between them, fragile in a new way. Evan poured more water into the kettle and set it on the stove. He moved deliberately, letting the rhythm of small tasks ground him. He had learned long ago that adrenaline, if left alone, turned inward and did damage of its own. Lucas followed every movement with his eyes. "They took her to the hospital?" Lucas asked. "Yes," Evan said. "Up by the ridge. They'll warm her slowly. Fluids. She'll wake up." Lucas swallowed. "Can I go see her?" "Not tonight," Evan said gently. "Road's not safe, but tomorrow, if the weather breaks, we'll figure it out." The boy nodded again. But this time his shoulders sagged. The energy that had carried him across the snow, that had knocked on a stranger's door without hesitation, was finally draining away. Evan recognized the signs. He crouched and opened a low cabinet, pulling out an old board game with a missing corner and a deck of cards worn soft at the edges. "We can play something," Evan said, "or you can sleep." Lucas glanced at the couch, then at the stove. "Sleep," he said, embarrassed by the need. Evan laid another blanket on the couch and pointed to it. Lucas didn't need more instruction. He kicked off his boots and climbed under, curling onto his side with the practiced efficiency of a child used to making do. Within minutes, his breathing slowed, evened out. Evan watched until he was certain the boy was asleep. The house felt different then, not fuller. Just altered, as if it had taken a step it couldn't take back. Evan sat at the table and rubbed his hands together, working warmth into his fingers. His mind replayed the sight of Sarah slumped in the car, the weakness of her pulse. He knew the odds. Hypothermia took its toll quietly, sometimes leaving damage that didn't announce itself until later. He pushed the thought aside. Worry could wait until there was something to do with it. At dawn, the storm finally loosened its grip. The sky lightened from black to iron gray, and the lake revealed itself again, rough and restless but visible. Evan stepped onto the porch and surveyed the road. Snowdrifts still blocked sections, but the worst had settled. The porch light clicked off automatically in the growing daylight, leaving a faint afterimage in Evan's vision. When he stepped back inside, Lucas was awake, sitting up on the couch with his hair flattened on one side and confusion written plainly across his face. It took a moment for memory to catch up. "Morning," Evan said. Lucas nodded. "I didn't dream," he said, as if that were noteworthy. Evan poured oatmeal into a pot and set it to cook. "That happens sometimes," he said. "Means your body was busy." They ate in near silence, punctuated by the sound of wind moving through bare branches. Lucas ate slowly but steadily, color returning to his cheeks with each bite. When he finished, he wrapped his hands around the bowl as if reluctant to let the warmth go. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the door. Evan opened it to find a woman standing on the porch, her boots dusted with snow, her coat zipped to the chin. She was in her early 60s, short and solid, with gray hair pulled back into a practical braid. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp and kind in equal measure. "Morning," she said. "I'm Margaret Hale. I live 2 houses down when the houses are visible." She smiled faintly. "The EMTs stopped by last night. Said you might have a kid with you." Evan nodded. "He's inside." Margaret stepped just far enough onto the porch to peer past him. "Lucas," she said, recognizing the boy immediately, "you gave your mother half the town a scare." Lucas stood behind Evan, shoulders stiff. "She's okay," he said, more statement than question. "She's stable," Margaret said. "They'll keep her overnight." She turned to Evan. "You did good." Evan accepted the words without comment. Praise was uncomfortable, especially when it felt undeserved. Margaret glanced at the stove, the tidy kitchen, the blankets folded neatly on the couch. "You've been alone a long time," she said, not accusing, just observant. "Yes," Evan said. Margaret nodded. "It shows, in the way things are ready." She stayed long enough to deliver a loaf of bread and a jar of soup she'd brought in a bag, insisting without insisting. When she left, Lucas watched from the window until she disappeared down the road. "She didn't look at me like I was trouble," Lucas said. "No," Evan agreed. She looks at people like they're still part of the town, even when they try not to be. Lucas considered that. You try not to be? Evan paused. I used to, he said. Sometimes I forget to stop. That afternoon, Evan took Lucas to the edge of the logging road to show him where the car had been. The tracks were already softening, edges blurring under a weak sun. Evan pointed out landmarks, the leaning trees, the ditch hidden by snow. Lucas listened intently, absorbing details the way some children did when they sensed knowledge was a kind of armor. You walked a long way, Evan said. In bad weather. Lucas shrugged. I just kept going where the light was. The simplicity of it struck Evan harder than it should have. As evening approached, the phone rang. Evan answered to hear the voice of a nurse from the hospital, clear, efficient, reassuring. Sarah had regained consciousness. She was asking for her son. Evan closed his eyes briefly. I'll bring him tomorrow, he said. When he hung up, Lucas was standing beside him, hope bright and fragile on his face. She's awake? He asked. Yes, Evan said. And she wants to see you. Lucas smiled then, fully and without reservation. It was the first time Evan had seen that expression on him. The house seemed to take notice. That night, after Lucas went to sleep, Evan sat by the window and watched the lake breathe. He thought of the choices that had led him here, some deliberate, some accidental. He had not planned to open his door. He had not planned to care. Yet here he was, measuring the road conditions for morning, setting an alarm he rarely used, making room. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind. And Evan, for the first time in years, did not rush to clear it away. Morning arrived without apology. The light over Lake Superior was thin and pale, spreading across the ice like a held breath finally released. The storm's violence had moved on, but it left behind a silence that felt heavier than noise. Evan Cross stood at the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug he had reheated twice without noticing. The road beyond the house was still uneven, rutted by drifts and half-cleared by a plow that had given up too early. It was passable if you knew how to read snow, how to listen to the tires, how to stop before confidence became error. Behind him, Lucas sat at the table with a bowl of oatmeal gone cold, pushing the spoon through it in slow circles. The boy had changed overnight. The tension that had sharpened him yesterday was still there, but it had rearranged itself into something quieter, anticipation edged with fear. He wore one of Evan's old sweatshirts, the sleeves rolled twice at the cuffs. It swallowed his frame but gave him a sense of borrowed solidity. We'll go slow, Evan said, finally breaking the silence. If the road gets bad, we turn back. Lucas nodded. She's really awake? Yes, Evan said. She asked for you. That's not something people do when they're drifting. Lucas absorbed that, nodding again, his jaw setting with determination. Evan recognized it. He had worn the same expression at different ages, under different skies, when retreat wasn't an option worth considering. Evan moved through the house with methodical efficiency, packing a small bag, water, a protein bar, the medical kit he hadn't put away yet. He checked the truck twice, brushed snow from the hood, tested the tires with his boot. The engine turned over slowly, reluctantly, then settled into a low rumble. Evan waited, listening for irregularities. None came. Margaret Hale appeared at the edge of the road as they pulled out, her figure bundled in a heavy coat, scarf wrapped high against her chin. She raised a hand, not to stop them, just to be seen. Evan slowed the truck and rolled the window down. You take care, she said. Her eyes flicked to Lucas, then back to Evan. The roads look honest until they don't, Evan nodded. We'll be careful. Margaret's gaze lingered a moment longer. You already have been, she said, and stepped back. The drive to the hospital took longer than it should have. Evan navigated around drifts, eased past blind curves, trusted instinct where signs were buried. Lucas watched the landscape with a focus that bordered on vigilance, as if memorizing the route in case he ever had to walk it again. When the hospital finally came into view, a low concrete building crouched against the cold. It felt like crossing a border. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Heat pressed in from all sides, almost overwhelming after the sharp restraint of winter. A nurse with tired eyes and a clipped efficiency checked them in and pointed down a hallway. Evan followed at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets, letting Lucas set the pace. Sarah lay propped up in a narrow bed, blankets pulled to her chest. Color had returned to her face, though it was a fragile thing, easily lost. Her dark blonde hair was loose now, falling around her shoulders, and her eyes, blue, Evan noticed, were bright with relief the moment she saw Lucas. "Hey," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Lucas crossed the room in 3 quick steps and stopped short, unsure, as if afraid of breaking something. Sarah reached out, fingers trembling, and pulled him close. He leaned into her the way children did when they needed reassurance more than words. Evan turned slightly away, giving them privacy without leaving. "I'm sorry," Sarah murmured into Lucas's hair. "I should have stopped earlier. I thought I could make it." Lucas shook his head. "You're okay," he said, repeating it like a promise he needed to hear himself. A doctor entered quietly, a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested long hours and careful patience. His name tag read, Dr. Alan Brooks. He greeted Sarah with calm familiarity, then nodded to Evan. "She was lucky," Dr. Brooks said, not dramatizing it. "Another hour in that car and we'd be having a different conversation." He explained the plan: observation, fluids, warming, rest. Sarah listened intently, nodding, asking the right questions. Responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders, visible in the way she held herself upright despite exhaustion. When the doctor left, Sarah looked at Evan fully for the first time. "You're the one who found us," she said. "Yes," Evan replied. "Thank you," she said. The words carried weight, not gratitude alone, but recognition. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't left that light on." Evan shifted slightly. Praise still unsettled him. "Your son did the hard part," he said. "He kept moving." Sarah squeezed Lucas's hand. "He always does," she said softly. Arrangements followed quickly. Sarah would be discharged the next day if all went well. She had no immediate place to stay. The car was still buried, and the weather remained unpredictable. Evan felt the familiar internal resistance rise before he could stop it. Hosting meant commitment. Commitment meant vulnerability. "I can help until things settle," he heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as they did Sarah. She studied his face carefully, perhaps expecting hesitation to follow. When it didn't, she nodded. "I won't impose longer than necessary," she said. "I promise." Promises mattered to Evan. He nodded once, sealing it. The drive back to the cabin was quieter. Lucas leaned against the window, exhaustion finally claiming him. Evan's thoughts stayed on the road. But something else threaded through them, a sense of inevitability he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a detour, it was a turn. When they arrived, the porch light was still on, glowing faintly against the gray afternoon. Evan turned it off manually for the first time in days, then hesitated and turned it back on. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. Inside, he prepared soup while Lucas slept on the couch. The house accommodated the presence easily, as if it had been waiting. Evan set an extra bowl on the counter without thinking. That evening, Margaret stopped by again, bringing a small bag of groceries and news from town. "Plow should clear the road by morning," she said. "Hospital called. She's asking after you." Evan absorbed that quietly. "We'll get her tomorrow," he said. After Margaret left, Evan sat alone at the table, listening to the stove hum. He thought of the decisions that lay ahead, temporary ones that had a habit of becoming permanent if you weren't careful. He felt the old instinct to pull back, to narrow his life until it fit neatly again. But another feeling held him in place, unfamiliar but steady. He looked toward the couch where Lucas slept, then toward the door, the light still burning beyond it. The weight of morning decisions pressed in, but it did not crush him. For once, Evan did not plan an exit. Sarah arrived at the cabin just after noon, escorted by a volunteer driver from the hospital, whose name Evan forgot as soon as the man left. The truck disappeared down the road, its tire tracks already softening under a weak sun. Sarah stood on the porch for a moment before stepping inside, as if the threshold required permission. She looked better than she had in the car. Color returned cautiously to her cheeks, posture upright but guarded. She was of average height, her build slender in a way that suggested she moved through life efficiently rather than forcefully. Her dark blonde hair was tied back again, neat but not careful, and her skin carried the pallor of someone who had spent a night negotiating with cold. She wore borrowed clothes, Margaret's spare coat, slightly too large at the shoulders, and held herself with the restrained composure of a woman determined not to be a burden. Evan closed the door behind her and locked it out of habit. The click sounded louder than it should have. Sarah noticed and offered a small, apologetic smile. "I won't be in your way," she said, as if preempting a concern he hadn't voiced. "You'll be warm," Evan replied. He took her bag and set it by the table. "We'll take it one day at a time." Lucas hovered near the couch, watching his mother with an intensity that bordered on vigilance. He had not let go of her hand during the drive and now seemed reluctant to release the contact. When she finally sat, he perched beside her close enough that their knees touched. Evan recognized the posture immediately, the way children became anchors when fear had knocked them loose. The house adjusted again, this time with deliberation. Evan cleared space on the counter for Sarah's things, moved a chair so it wouldn't crowd her path, set an extra mug out without thinking. He noticed himself doing these things and did not stop. The instinct to accommodate had returned quietly, without fanfare. That afternoon, Sarah slept on the couch while Lucas read from a paperback Margaret had dropped off. Evan split wood outside, letting the rhythm settle him. Each swing of the axe landed clean, the sound sharp and honest. He stacked the logs neatly, building a wall that would last through the next cold snap. When he came back inside, the air smelled faintly of soup and cedar. The house held warmth in a way it hadn't before. Sarah woke near dusk, disoriented for a moment, then oriented quickly. She joined Evan at the table while he ladled soup into bowls. She ate slowly, carefully, as if testing her body's willingness to cooperate. Evan watched without staring. "I don't usually accept help," Sarah said, setting the spoon down between bites. "But I don't pretend I can do everything alone." Evan nodded. "Neither do I, anymore." She studied him then, not prying, just attentive. "You have a way of being prepared," she said, "not anxious, just ready." "It's a habit," Evan replied. He did not add where it came from. He didn't need to. The knock came later, measured and firm. Evan opened the door to find a man standing on the porch with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He was in his mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, beard trimmed close, eyes quick and assessing. He wore a county jacket and boots polished not for show, but for durability. His posture was open, but his gaze missed nothing. "Evening," the man said. "Name's Caleb Dunn, County Social Services." He glanced past Evan, noting the light, the table set for more than one. "Just checking in. Hospital flagged a temporary housing arrangement." Sarah rose from the couch immediately, her shoulders stiffening. "I'm here," she said. "I can answer whatever you need." Caleb Dunn's expression softened a fraction. "That's all I'm here for," he said. He stepped just inside, careful to keep space. He spoke plainly, asking about the plan, how long they intended to stay, whether Sarah had support once the roads cleared. He listened when Sarah answered, nodding, making notes. His questions were direct but not accusatory, the kind that assumed competence rather than deficiency. Evan stood nearby, hands resting on the back of a chair. He answered when asked, kept his tone neutral. He noticed Dunn's eyes flick to the locked door, the stacked wood, the generator cord visible through the window. The man took it all in and wrote nothing about it. "I'll check back in a week," Dunn said finally. "Until then, you're clear." He paused, then added, "You handled a bad night well." After he left, Sarah exhaled shakily. "I hate being evaluated," she said. "So does everyone," Evan replied. "Doesn't mean it's a judgment." That night the lake quieted. The ice shifted without drama, the sound distant and low. Lucas slept early, exhaustion claiming him without protest. Sarah sat at the table, staring at her hands. "I should have stopped sooner," she said, not looking up. "I thought pushing through would save time, money. I didn't think about what would happen if it didn't." Evan leaned back against the counter. "Most people don't," he said. "They think the cost is time. Sometimes it's something else." She nodded, accepting the truth without argument. "Thank you," she said again, this time softer, "for staying." Evan didn't answer immediately. He thought of the ways he had perfected leaving. He thought of the porch light, still on. "You didn't ask me to," he said. "I chose it." Morning brought a clearer sky and a problem that had been waiting politely. the car. Evan and Lucas walked down to the logging road together, the snow firm enough to hold weight. They stood beside the half-buried vehicle, the doors rimed with ice. "We'll need help," Evan said. "Winch, chains." Lucas nodded, absorbing the reality without panic. Margaret might know someone. Margaret did. By noon, a battered pickup arrived with a winch and a driver who spoke little and worked steadily. The car came free in stages, metal protesting, snow giving way. When it finally sat on the road again, Lucas grinned, a brief, bright expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Back at the cabin, Sarah packed slowly, deliberately. Evan watched her from the doorway, the old urge to manage pressing in. He let it go. Temporary things, he reminded himself, needed space to be temporary. But when the car was ready and the road cleared, Sarah did not rush. She stood on the porch, looking out at the lake. "I can't stay long," she said, "but I don't want to leave like this." Evan nodded. "You don't have to." They agreed on a night more, one more dinner. One more morning to decide next steps with clearer heads. Evan turned the porch light off when the sun went down, then turned it back on again. The gesture surprised him. Inside, the house held the quiet of people choosing not to hurry. Evan set the table. Lucas helped. Sarah washed dishes, steady hands regaining confidence. The shape of temporary things had changed, not fragile, not rushed, just present. Evan stood at the window after everyone slept and watched the road, the lake, the light. He understood now that temporary did not mean insignificant. Sometimes it meant necessary. And sometimes it meant the beginning of something that asked you to stay a little longer than planned. The morning did not rush them. Light crept in through the windows and settled on the table, the stove, the floorboards marked by old use and newer footsteps. The lake lay visible beyond the trees, restless but no longer hostile. Evan Cross woke before anyone else, as he always did, and stood for a moment in the quiet, listening for the small signals that told him the house was safe. The low tick of cooling metal, the hum of the refrigerator, the absence of wind clawing at the walls. He brewed coffee and let it sit, black and bitter, while the day decided what it would ask of him. Sarah woke next. She moved carefully, still gauging her strength, but there was more steadiness in her gait than the night before. The color in her cheeks had settled into something real. She wore the same borrowed sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair tied back with a band she'd found in her bag. Her eyes were clearer now, less guarded. She paused in the doorway to the kitchen, taking in the space as if seeing it for the first time. "I slept," she said, a small wonder in her voice. "All the way through." Evan nodded. "That helps." Lucas followed soon after, drawn by the smell of coffee and toast. He moved with the casual confidence of a child who had decided this place would not vanish if he blinked. He set 3 plates on the table without being asked, then hesitated, as if waiting for permission to claim the habit. "Go ahead," Evan said. They ate quietly. It wasn't an awkward quiet. It was the kind that came after the worst questions had been answered, when the body needed time to catch up with relief. Sarah watched Lucas eat and then looked up at Evan. "I called my sister," she said. "She's in Escanaba. She can come tomorrow if the road stays clear." Evan considered the map in his head, the weather patterns, the distance. "That's reasonable," Sarah nodded. "I don't want to overstay." Evan held her gaze, steady and unchallenging. "We said one more day," he replied. "One more day is still one more day." She accepted that, grateful without being effusive. Gratitude, Evan had learned, worked best when it didn't try to pay itself back immediately. Mid-morning brought a visitor Evan did not expect. A truck eased up the road and stopped short of the porch. The man who stepped out moved with the careful balance of someone used to uneven ground. He was in his late 50s, broad-chested, with a thick gray beard and weathered skin that told a story of wind and sun rather than offices. His jacket was patched at the elbows, his gloves worn soft. He carried a coil of rope over one shoulder and a toolbox in the other hand. "Name's Henry Pike," he said when Evan opened the door. "Margaret said you might need a hand with the car." Evan stepped aside. "We got it free yesterday." Henry nodded, pleased but not disappointed. "Then I'm here to check the brakes. Cold like that can do things you don't hear until it's too late." Sarah came to the doorway, concern flickering across her face. Henry offered a reassuring smile. "Won't take long," he said. "I've been doing this longer than I care to admit." They walked down to the road together. Henry worked methodically, hands sure, eyes sharp. He spoke little while he worked, then explained what he found in plain language. No dramatics, no scare tactics. "You'll make it to Escanaba," he said finally. "Just don't rush." Lucas watched closely, asking questions when he thought of them. Henry answered each one, patient and direct. Evan noticed the way Lucas stood a little straighter, absorbing competence the way children did when they sensed it was transferable. When Henry left, he did so with a nod and no expectation of thanks. Evan respected that. The house felt steadier afterward, as if another line of support had been quietly added beneath it. The afternoon passed with small tasks that mattered. Sarah folded laundry she'd washed by hand. Lucas helped Evan replace a warped hinge on the porch gate. The work was simple, but it carried a satisfaction that had nothing to do with completion. Evan showed Lucas how to set the screws straight, how to feel when the wood would split if pushed too hard. Lucas listened, focused, repeating the motions until they felt right. "You're good at this," Evan said. Lucas shrugged, pleased but careful not to show it. "I like knowing how things work." "So do I," Evan replied. The admission surprised him. He hadn't meant it as a confession, but it landed that way. As dusk approached, the sky took on the soft steel color that preceded another cold night. Evan turned the porch light on early, then paused, hand still on the switch. He left it on, not because he expected anyone, because he no longer wanted the house to look like it was holding its breath. After dinner, Sarah stood by the window, watching the lake darken. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "For us." Evan joined her, standing at a respectful distance. "You don't have to know all of it," he said. "Just the next right thing." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you've practiced that." "I have," Evan said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Later, when Lucas had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the table with a mug of tea. "You don't live this way by accident," she said. "Being ready, being alone." Evan considered the question behind the statement. "I learned to keep things small," he said. "Small is manageable." "And now?" she asked. Evan looked around the room, the extra chair pulled close, the folded blankets, the light still on outside. "Now I'm learning that small doesn't have to mean empty." Sarah nodded, accepting the answer without pressing for more. Some truths needed room to breathe. Night settled gently. The lake whispered rather than roared. Evan did his last checks and then sat at the table with a notebook he hadn't opened in years. He wrote a short list: weather, road conditions, the sisters' arrival time, practical things, anchors. When he finished, he did not tear the page out. He left it there, visible. He went to the window one last time and looked out at the road, the light, the dark beyond. He thought of the storm and what it had demanded, and of what remained now that it had moved on. The house held. The people within it slept. The choices ahead were no longer about escape. They were about what he was willing to carry forward. The sister arrived just after noon, her headlights cresting the low rise at the end of the road like a promise kept on time. Evan Cross watched from the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, the lake behind him quiet and steel-colored. The truck pulled in carefully, tires crunching over packed snow, and stopped with the engine idling a moment longer than necessary. The driver stepped out and stood, scanning the clearing with an appraising eye. She was taller than Sarah by a few inches, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd learned to carry weight without complaint. Her hair was dark and cut to a practical length that framed a face marked by sun and resolve rather than softness. She wore a thick coat zipped high, gloves already scuffed at the palms, and boots that had seen work. When she walked, she did so with purpose, but not haste. This was Megan, the older sister, someone who had learned to be decisive because waiting too long had cost her once. Sarah stepped onto the porch beside Evan. "That's her," she said, a relief she didn't try to hide. Megan crossed the distance and took Sarah into a careful embrace, mindful of ribs that still protested. She then crouched in front of Lucas, eyes level with his, studying him for injuries she already suspected weren't there. Satisfied, she stood and extended a hand to Evan. "Thank you," Megan said simply, "for the light, for everything." Evan took her hand, her grip firm and honest. "You're welcome," he replied, and meant it without deflection. They moved inside for coffee and logistics. Megan spoke plainly. She had a place ready in Escanaba, had taken time off, would handle the car once it arrived. She asked questions that showed competence rather than control, and she listened when Evan answered. Sarah watched the exchange with something like gratitude layered over fatigue. Lucas drifted between them, half listening, half relieved to see the adult world align into something dependable. Packing followed, slow and careful. Sarah folded borrowed clothes and returned them to neat piles. Lucas carried his few belongings in a backpack that had gained weight with snacks and small kindnesses. Evan moved around them, opening space when needed, stepping back when not. He felt the pull of habit, the urge to finalize, to resolve everything before it could fray. But he resisted it. Some things needed to leave unfinished to remain true. Outside, the road waited, open and unthreatening. The lake held its breath. Megan loaded the truck and checked straps, her movements precise. Sarah lingered on the porch, eyes tracing the grain of the rail, the hinge Evan had fixed, the light fixture above the door. "I don't want this to feel like we're taking something from you," she said. Evan considered the words. "You didn't," he said. "You gave me something to do." She smiled at that, then surprised him by stepping closer and hugging him briefly, carefully. "If you ever come south," she said, "there's a spare room." "I'll remember," Evan replied, knowing memory didn't always require intention. Lucas hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged Evan with sudden fierceness. Evan froze for a fraction of a second, then returned the gesture with a hand steady and warm between the boy's shoulders. When Lucas pulled back, his eyes were bright but steady. "You can keep the light on," Lucas said. "For other people." Evan nodded. "I will." They left with a wave and a promise to call. The truck eased down the road and vanished beyond the bend. The clearing returned to stillness, a deeper one than before. Evan stood for a long moment after the sound faded, measuring the quiet and finding it changed. He went inside and set the extra mug back on the shelf. He folded the blankets and placed them in the closet without erasing the crease where they'd been used. He turned the porch light off, then on again, then left it on. The choice felt different now, no longer a habit inherited from danger, but an invitation offered without expectation. The afternoon unfolded with small, ordinary tasks. Evan repaired a loose fence post, stacked the remaining wood, checked the generator fuel. He found himself pausing more often, listening not for threat, but for the absence of it. The lake breathed, the wind moved branches with a gentler hand. Near dusk, Margaret Hale walked up the road, scarf wrapped high, eyes bright. She stopped at the gate and waited. Evan waved her in. "They gone?" she asked. "Yes," Evan said. She nodded, taking in the emptier space without sorrow. "You look, steadier," she said. "Not lighter, just steadier." Evan considered that. "So do you," Margaret smiled. "We get that way when we remember what we're for." She handed him a small envelope. "From the hospital. They called earlier." Inside was a note, short, handwritten, careful. A thank you from Sarah, a promise to send updates, a line from Lucas drawn in thick pencil, a house with a light and a lake behind it. Evan folded the paper once and slipped it into the notebook he'd left on the table. That night, Evan cooked a simple meal and ate it alone. The quiet returned, but it did not accuse him. It sat beside him, companionable. He washed the dishes and left one plate to dry where another had been that morning. He noticed and did not correct it. Later, he drove into town for the first time since the storm. The grocery store lights were harsh and comforting all at once. Denise at the register looked up and smiled. "Haven't seen you in a bit," she said. "I was busy," Evan replied. She scanned his items and nodded. "That happens." On the drive home, Evan took the long way, following the curve along the lake. The road was clear now, the sky open. He rolled the window down a fraction and let the cold air in, sharp and honest. He felt present in a way he hadn't for years. Back at the house, he turned the porch light off before going inside, then paused and turned it back on. He stood at the window and watched the road until night fully claimed it. He thought of all the times he'd chosen distance because it felt safer, smaller, manageable. He thought of the storm and what it had demanded. He thought of the road that opened both ways, outward, yes, but also inward toward responsibility freely taken. He sat at the table and opened the notebook again. Beneath the practical list from days before, he wrote a single sentence and underlined it once. Keep the light on. Evan closed the book and leaned back, the house holding him easily. The future did not rush him. It waited, patient and possible. Spring arrived the way it often did along Lake Superior, not with celebration, but with permission. Snow retreated in thin, patient lines, exposing dark earth that smelled alive again. The lake lost its steel edge and took on a moving gray, restless but no longer threatening. Evan Cross noticed the change in the mornings first. He woke without bracing himself. The house no longer felt like a shelter he occupied between storms. It felt like a place that expected him to be there. He kept the porch light on through the last of winter out of intention, not habit. When daylight lingered longer in the evenings, he let the switch rest. He learned to read the sky again, when to turn it on early, when to leave it dark because the road didn't need guidance tonight. The light had learned a new purpose, and so had he. Work found him without asking. Boats needed repairs as soon as the marina thawed. Docks shifted, bolts loosened, engines coughed themselves awake. Evan showed up early and stayed late, not to prove anything, but because the work made sense. He spoke more than he used to, not much, just enough. The men he worked alongside noticed the difference. They didn't comment. They rarely did. One afternoon, a young couple pulled into the clearing with a flat tire and a look of embarrassment that suggested they'd expected a lecture. Evan fixed the tire without one. He offered water and directions. They left with relief written plainly on their faces. The porch light was off when they arrived. It wasn't needed. Evan watched their taillights disappear and felt the quiet settle around him, unafraid. He heard from Sarah and Megan by mail first, postcards with blocky handwriting, updates about work and school and the car that had finally been sold for something reliable. Lucas added drawings whenever he could, houses with lights, roads with bends, people standing close enough to touch without crowding one another. Evan pinned one drawing to the corkboard above the desk. He didn't frame it. He didn't need to. Margaret Hale came by often now, sometimes with news, sometimes with nothing at all. She sat at the table and drank coffee the way she did everything else, present, unhurried. They talked about weather and town meetings and the way the lake could still surprise you if you stopped paying attention. Evan listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, the words landed without effort. Late one evening, as the last of the ice broke free and drifted out into open water, Evan heard a sound at the door. Not a knock, a pause. He opened it to find a man standing on the porch with his hands visible and his posture careful. The man was in his early 30s, lean, with close-cropped hair and a short beard that didn't hide the tension at his jaw. His jacket was county issue, but older, worn at the seams. He introduced himself as Tom Alvarez, newly assigned to emergency response coordination for the area. His eyes moved quickly, cataloging details without judgment. "We're updating response routes," Tom said, "mapping places that can serve as temporary shelter if the road goes bad again. Margaret mentioned you keep your light on." Evan considered the words. Temporary shelter. He hadn't planned for it. He hadn't refused it either. "Sometimes," he said. Tom nodded. "That's enough." They walked the perimeter together, talking through contingencies in plain language. Evan pointed out drifts, blind curves, the places where wind did the most damage. Tom listened, took notes, asked questions that showed he respected local knowledge. When they finished, Tom extended his hand. "We don't ask people to be heroes," he said. "We ask them to be present." Evan shook his hand. "I can do present." The arrangement was simple. No signs, no announcements. If the weather turned and someone needed a place to wait, Evan's porch light would mean what it meant before. Come closer. Not because he owed anything, because he chose it. The first test came sooner than expected. A late spring squall rolled in from the lake, sudden and sharp. Visibility dropped. Evan turned the porch light on without thinking. He set the kettle to boil. He laid out blankets the way he'd learned to do once and never forgotten. A family arrived before dusk. Two parents, a teenager, a dog shivering more from surprise than cold. Evan ushered them inside and handed out mugs without ceremony. The dog, a medium-sized mutt with a white blaze on its chest and ears too big for its head, paced once, then settled near the stove, indeterminate, but eyes bright. Evan noticed how the presence of another living thing changed the air and led it. They waited out the squall and left an hour later with thanks and a promise to pay it forward. Evan watched them go and turned the light off again when the road cleared. The house returned to quiet without resentment. On a warm afternoon that smelled like wet earth and possibility, Evan drove into town and stopped by the school. He didn't go inside. He stood by the fence and watched children spill out, noise and movement everywhere. He felt no urge to retreat. He felt no need to belong there. He simply witnessed, and that was enough. Weeks later, a package arrived. Inside was a small wooden plaque carved by hand, a simple outline of a house in a single circle where the light would be. On the back, in careful writing, Lucas had added a note. "Thank you for keeping it on until we could find our way." Evan placed the plaque by the door. He did not overthink it. Summer settled in fully, and with it came the rhythms he'd forgotten he missed. Evenings stretched. The lake breathed easily. Evan grilled on the porch and ate there, watching the sky change color without urgency. The light stayed off most nights now. When it came on, it did so with clarity. One night, long after sunset, Evan sat at the table with his notebook open. He wrote less than he used to. When he did write, it wasn't lists of contingencies. It was reminders, simple truths learned slowly. He added a final line beneath the one he'd underlined weeks before and did not underline it at all. Be ready. Stay kind. Choose to stay. He closed the notebook and stood. He turned the porch light on, not because someone was there, but because someone might be. The road lay open and quiet, a ribbon of possibility. Evan felt no fear in the waiting. He had learned the difference between being alone and being empty. Outside, the lake reflected the light in small, honest ways. Inside, the house held its shape, prepared but not tense. Evan stood in the doorway and breathed in the evening air, grounded and present. The light did not call attention to itself. It didn't need to. It simply did what it had learned to do, stay on long enough for someone to find their way, and off when the way was clear. And for the first time, Evan understood that this was what home meant. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, as a knock in the dark, a light left on, or a heart that chooses to stay open when it would be easier to turn away. God often works not through extraordinary strength, but through ordinary obedience, through people who choose compassion over fear, through moments when we decide to stay, to care, to love, even when no one is watching. In our everyday lives, we are given the same choice this man was given, to close the door and protect ourselves, or to open it, trust God, and become part of someone else's miracle. You may never know how deeply a small act of kindness can change a life, but God knows, and He uses willing hearts to bring warmth into the coldest seasons. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We would love to pray for you. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue sharing stories of faith, love, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect your home, guide your steps, and remind you that you are never alone, even in the darkest nights. And may His light shine through you so others may find their way. Amen.